just going to sort of set the scene, and then I'm going to hand over to Joe, because a lot of this meeting is going to be about discussions and Joe's going to facilitate that. Just before we start, I just wanted to sort of give a little bit of a recap of where we're up to and why we're coming together in this meeting in this way. We're on the 8th Assembly meeting, and the idea behind the Assembly initially was to get together a wider group of VCFSE organisations across the ICS area as we progress with building that equitable relationship with health and care. I think as we formed in November 2022, it seemed like a good time to take stock now. And there are lots of developments that are taking place. So it makes sense to come together and think about the direction of travel for the Assembly as the ICS makes plans and changes things, delivers things at different levels and does things as we move forward. So I think when we go back to thinking about the purpose of the Assembly and that ability, I suppose, for the alliance leaders to sense check some of the work with the wider sector, to also obviously keep people in the sector informed about what's developing around the health and care agenda, and give you an opportunity to ask questions, but also to help shape some of that. So we're quite conscious that it was quite an ambitious agenda for the Assembly, and where we think there's been some really good opportunities for us to come together. So I can think of some of the times we've come together and planned things and shaped things that then the Alliance or Joe, myself and Angela have been able to take forward. And I think it's been a really useful forum. But I think what we're trying to do now really is think about what it looks like for the future. And we did have a meeting a few months ago now with a smaller group of colleagues, and I don't know if all of them are here today, or I think some of them are, to really talk about their perspective in terms of the Assembly. And we got some really good feedback around the direction of travel. So that's the kind of overview of today's meeting. Like I said, Joe's going to facilitate some of the discussion, and I think you've got some questions, haven't you, Joe, that you want to ask around that. I'm just wondering, would it be worthwhile? I don't know who is here, Joe. We did think about doing updates from the reps who sit across those system groups, boards, forums. Is it worth us asking people to do those updates, or do you want to go straight into the discussing the Assembly?
I think we did originally have that in the plan. Where I'm at now is that the purpose of this and sort of the pre-work that was communicated through Eventbrite was thinking about what is everybody's priorities for the Assembly. And then at the Alliance, we had that discussion about the next steps for what we think the Assembly might do, and we want to test some of that out today. So I think it's probably worth noting that the priorities that people are identifying is what the reps are going to attempt, keyword, to progress and pursue in those committees and boards. So I don't think it's really useful right now to try and get updates about what's happening. It might be particularly because a lot of the feedback we've had about the Assembly is wanting it to become more proactive and more interactive. So I suspect if we just kind of, unless anybody has an objection, we would just very briefly say where we're up to with who's where, and some of the requests that we've got out for reps at the moment and some of them that are coming, and then we can dive straight into the meat of it. Would that be all right, Tracy?
Yes, that sounds good to me, Joe. Yeah.
So unless anybody puts the hand up now, I'm just going to share my screen with where people are in the sector, in the system, and what our next Tracy, you're the only person I can see while I'm presenting.
Yes,
So
I
can you see
that.
my screen? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I can, Joe.
So,
yeah, thank you.
Great. So this is the where the Alliance website is on the Healthier Lancashire and South Cumbria website. So we're just going to go into the page and then go to our work and system meetings, and that's where you can see the lists of who's where and who's doing what. So I'm not going to read through all of these, but you can see that there are a number of names that repeat, and then there are some where there are no voluntary sector representatives. So this is something that's been quite useful for us, and in our dealings with other voluntary sector alliances and other voluntary sector networks across England, people are noticing this and saying that this is a really useful tool with the sort of transparency of representation. So I just want to draw your attention to this one. So Lancashire Health and Wellbeing Board are out to recruitment via the Alliance for a voluntary sector rep on there. And so Stephanie, who's on the call, has created the expression of interest. So you just click on that and it forces a download to your browser window, and then you can have a look at what they're doing. And all we're asking for is an email that sort of outlines how you fit those criteria if you're interested. Coming up, there are going to be things about the people board, people committee, which is a workforce thing for the ICB. There are 4 subcommittees under that around system training and education. So and any of you in that world, that would be an interesting one. There's also going to be things around culture and well-being, so they'll come through. But this is the main. This website is our main tool for communicating with people, with yourselves. So what this has led to, I'm going to stop sharing that now. What this has led to is a number of reps being across our system, and essentially now saying via the Alliance, it's not good enough that we're just there. It's not good enough that we're filling a seat. What are we actually doing, and how are we communicating both pre the session and post the session with Alliance and Assembly and all the rest of it, and what are the priorities that we are trying to achieve there? So are there things that span across, things like the quality committee, things like the people committee, things like, what's the most esoteric one we've got? The clinical and care professional leaders assembly, which Vicky Shepherd from Age UK, Blackburn with Darwin, and Catherine Mayeba from CGL attend. So I think that's the purpose of today, really, is to find out what are your priorities, and can we get a fairly succinct number that we can take into, and that can be the way that we progress as a group of voluntary sector representatives across the system. Now, those ones that I'm talking about have all been elected, for want of a better word, or recruited through the Voluntary Sector Alliance. Some have been selected. So, for example, Cumbria, the Cumbria Health and Wellbeing Board, which is now Westmorland with Furness Health and Wellbeing Board in Cumberland. Those have gone through different processes, but effectively, wherever there's a voluntary sector rep, and there's an important distinction between an organisation, for example, let's just pick one. No, don't read anything into this, but like a mental health charity being part of the mental health transformation programme makes absolute sense. They don't necessarily need to be there as a voluntary sector representative. But where you are there as a generalist, as in the sector, it's those people that we want to contact. And we've got people who sit on safeguarding boards, for example, who want to communicate what they're doing through the Alliance comms and gain insight to take into there. So what we're proposing is that we'd identify as many as we could across Lancashire and South Cumbria and bring those reps together in a forum, which would then be able to be fed into about priorities, and we figure out how best to do the communication. It is a big ask to be a voluntary sector rep, as many of you will know. So I think that's our way forward, and that's the purpose of today. Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah, okay. So what we were asking you to do prior to this event was to think about, oh, I've forgotten something. So you'll remember the state of the sector conversation we had at the last assembly at Westley Conference Centre, where we had voluntary sector input into what our state of the sector report. And at that point, we were definitely thinking about a report. And that has been fed into the design of what this will look like. On Friday, we have got the non-VCSE stakeholder event held at the Health Innovation Campus up in Lancaster, where it's our partners in our system coming together to say what they'd like to discover, what they'd like to see in this state of the sector, and equally how it can be presented to them in a useful way so that we're not just waving it outside the door, but actually they're ready and prepped to receive this information and know what they're going to do with it. So that's happening on Friday. Once that's happened, we'll have the voluntary sector assemblies input, we'll have the stakeholders input, and we're going to put those together into a brief, and we'll be working with colleagues in the sector and colleagues in the research institutions around us to actually start that work. We're also working very closely with LACVS, Lancashire Association of CVS, to make sure that the place is well reflected in that. Any questions about any of that from anyone? No? Okay. Well, in that case, I think what we'll do is we had planned to do breakout rooms. I think we're a sufficiently perfectly formed little group to not really need breakout rooms. So what I'm proposing we do is we talk about our priorities. So what are our priorities that we would like to see our system reps bringing into these discussions at system and other fora around Lancashire and South Cumbria? That's it, really. It's down to you. One of the examples we had, for example, was preventing short-termism in procurement and commissioning. It was things like the having a minimum period for contracts, or how we do data sharing. So those are the kinds of things that we wanted to tease out of today. It could be something entirely different from that. That's entirely fine as well. I really want as many people to participate in this as possible. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 faces on screen. Let's get more people opening up their cameras, and we'll use the raise hands function, and I'll keep track of who has got hands raised. So if you can come off, sorry, turn your cameras on and get into the discussion, that would be great. And I want to just open it up. We're talking about the integrated care system. That's the integrated care partnership, the integrated care board, health and wellbeing boards, all of these system meetings. And it's what your priorities are for our reps to make progress against. That's it. Who's going to go first? Don't make me pick you.
Hi there, it's Suzanne from Suzanne and Mel from Regenerate, formerly Age Concern.
Hi Suzanne. Let's just remember everybody
hello,
to
nice
use
to see some
use
faces,
the raise hands
some
function.
old faces there as well. On the just straight in then on the topic of the length of contract, I just thought I'd share some of our recent experiences. We have been involved in conversation about the restructuring of what's called the Dementia Community Links service. The objective of the ICB being to ensure that rather than the current kind of postcode lottery that there is on that community-based dementia care support service, it is more equitably distributed across the county. And that's great. We're very happy to have played our part in all of that. We've got no issues with that at all. During those conversations, we've obviously been talking about, well, it is going to involve, and it has already started to involve, a redistribution of who does what where amongst the existing service providers. The point that I want to come to is around contract length specifically. So we had hoped that this year, having trawled our way through that process review and type of service review and so on, this year we would have embarked upon that longer term contracting opportunity. It hasn't happened. We have got another 12-month gig. ICB has kicked the can down the road. We don't even have a promise that beyond into 25/6 there will be a guarantee 3-year. We have been told they're aiming for it. It's a kind of, yes, we're hoping to be able to do that, but there is no assurance at all. And from a business planning point of view, you know, I'm currently writing up annual reports and starting to again think about business planning going forward. That's going to be challenging because our auditors, and I don't know whether other charities are facing this as well now, but our auditors, who are actually new auditors, we've recently procured new ones this year, are saying that we have to be able to demonstrate business planning for 2 years ahead. That's the way the rules are changing. That's the way auditors of charities are being encouraged to go. So that piles the pressure on for us certainly, and probably other charities, in not necessarily being able to give those kind of guarantees of business continuity opportunity if this tactic continues. And obviously I'm only speaking from one specific service here and one particular arena.
Okay, thanks, Suzanne. Anybody else want to chime in on that point or similar with Regenerate, or anybody got any further points to make? I noticed Janet in the chat. When did potential contract lengths reduce from 5 years to 3? Okay. Any more points on this, either in support of what Regenerate just said or another point? Rachel.
I wasn't sure if my hand had worked then. I would just say that's something that we're aware of on the local project. It's one of the asks really, but as well as the length of contract, I'm thinking about reporting times as well, and the different lengths and different requirements for reporting, if that could be kind of made less onerous as well.
Okay, thanks, Rachel. Maggie?
I just similarly as Suzanne with regards to contract lengths, and that is an ongoing frustration that the sector are well familiar with at the end of the day. How we can tie that in potentially to some of the workforce development discussions, and whether we can maybe have some sort of pathway, making a case for longer term contracts as a pathway into the solution in relation to the NHS workforce challenges. Maybe might just be a different angle. I think if we're constantly just saying, oh, we want longer contracts, everybody knows that at the end of the day. But just trying to put a slightly different spin on, if you give us a longer contract, we could help you achieve, might be a better way of just looking at it. Similarly, when it comes to the reporting, how can we better make a case for longer term contracts to improve our evaluation and impact measuring, to try and have more in-depth measures, maybe something that fits better with what the ICB priorities are. I'm sure it's not just about the number of beds that they've got in hospitals. There are other measures. Is there something again that we can build into our ask for a longer term contract?
Thanks, Maggie. That's obviously something that would require tooth to tango, isn't it? So I think if we've got, so it'd be interesting to know kind of what we do individually and see if there's a way that we can level ourselves with how we do you mentioned that improving our impact and impact measurement and reporting. Be interesting to maybe explore how we all individually do that and look if there's a way that we can not have it the same thing, but as long as we're all hitting the same notes. But then it requires reciprocity from the other side, doesn't it, about recognizing those measures and those impact methodologies. All right, thank you. Mel.
Yeah, hi. We've been through a significant change and a significant transformation with the CCGs to the ICB. But I guess for the last 14 years, we've not been through a political change. And we are likely, I mean, this is not, I'm not making a political point here, I'm making a fairly obvious point. It is looking likely from all the polls that we see that there's going to be a government change, which potentially could be maybe a direction of travel change. The communication we've had from the ICB was fairly, I guess, generic, fairly standard, but fairly blunt in the sense of the execs are not in a position to be able to continue the conversations of the contract development discussion, and we'll be back in touch. In essence, something of that nature. It's the first time I've experienced this because I'm new to this sector, and I'm sure for other people who've been in it perhaps less than 14 years, what have seen a political change. But do we suspect significant change, significant priority alterations? What's the general consensus of this? Because I know it's something which could be significant to us in our futures.
So I know what, Tracy, you about to weigh in on that because I've got some insight from NHS England.
I wasn't going to weigh in, I was going to try and answer.
Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Yeah, and then if you can bring the NHS England insight in. I mean, mine is just from a strategic point of view, Mel, from thinking about what it is we're trying to achieve. And you're absolutely right, uncertainty comes, and having worked in this sector for well over 20 years, I have seen a change of government. And believe you and me, but what I was going to say is I've not seen a change of government in a long, long time from a Conservative government to a Labour government. And believe you and me, that does bring with it quite a lot of difference as well. So that's a really interesting thing to think about from one political party to the next. But what we're trying to achieve through the work that we're doing is about addressing health inequalities and about being able to use resources in the right way so that people can stay well, can get the right care in the right place at the right time. So I think when we look at it from a strategic perspective, I don't think a change of government is going to make a massive change to what we're actually trying to achieve. And I think if we continue as a sector, as we are doing, and it's interesting listening to the conversation so far, because I think Maggie made some really superb points about how do we make sure what we're doing aligns with the priorities of the ICB? How do we demonstrate our impact in terms of saying, well, actually, how do we solve some of your problems, not just ask for money to give longer term impact for our organisations? And I think that's the direction we're heading. So I think what I would say is that not a lot will change in terms of the way we structure ourselves as an alliance, as an assembly, in terms of the way we deliver things. I mean, my day job is citizens advice in Blackpool. I can't imagine that what we do will change massively with a change of government. I'd like to see legislative changes. And I bet you can guess about some of them, like Section 21s, that has never happened. But that aside, I think we will carry on delivering very similar services around health and care. So I don't know if that really answers your question, but maybe Joe's got some insights that have come down from NHS England.
Just some from NAVCA, some from NCVO, and some from NHS England, and some from other alliances across the country. I suppose the official line is that they're committed to integrated care, and they're not looking, as far as I'm aware, to change the trajectory that we're on substantially in a short period of time. So they're obviously hedging their bets in line with the way that the whole Labour manifesto has been laid out, that sort of under promise and over deliver. But as far as we can tell, there's no impetus to change the way that integrated care is happening. I do think that there might be a slight, but I'm reaching here, so I'm going to couch that with this. I do think there might be a slight de-emphasis on place, but I wouldn't put any money on that. Does that help, Mel? Yep. Okay, great.
For my benefit, Joe, could you just explain that last point? Sorry if I sound like I'm thick. Can you explain what you mean by a de-emphasis on place and what the implications might be for, well, is that Lancashire specifically, and or the Northwest or regionally, or what?
I don't have enough information to answer it anymore, to be honest, Suzanne.
Okay.
When I say that, the idea being this, it's on integrated care. So in the Act, integrated care boards are well described. Primary care networks are well described. Place is left quite ill described.
Okay.
And I don't know if, I think that was purposeful in the sort of subsidiarity conversations about local autonomy. But all of the rhetoric, not rhetoric, that's too harsh. All of the descriptions so far have been about the paramount importance of place in delivery. And I just, potentially I'm reading the tea leaves. So like I say, take this at face value. There may be a de-emphasis on that being the priority for the systems. Okay,
no, that's interesting. Thanks for that. Thank you.
I just want to, sorry, Maggie, just before you carry on, we're not going to miss the point about when did the potential for contract lengths reduce from 5 years to 3. I don't know that was ever a commitment, but if that sounds like it's one of the priorities, if we can, people can like that comment or something, and that gives us an idea if people are going for that one. And then also there's a comment there about Rachel about local negotiating contracts and payments with NHS on behalf of the VCFE sector. I'd like to know more about that, but let's bring Maggie in, please.
I just wanted to sort of follow on from the sort of political discussion that surely whichever government it is that gets in is still going to have to look to the voluntary sector as part of the solution for everything that's going on with the wider health and care system. And it's going to be really clear, isn't it, that the health and care system needs something, some investment, some change, whatever that is. So I can't imagine that we're not going to be part of that landscape going forward. I was also just thinking about the wider picture again. If we're thinking about more around the sort of preventative agenda and the difficulties of trying to shift resources from frontline to prevention, whether link, and I don't know how well we do it already, it might just be my lack of knowledge, but how well are we linked in with such as the local authority investment that's going on around such as levelling up? How much are we building health outcomes into those significant investment programs so that we're looking at the biggest picture that we possibly can? Because I'm also working away in those partnerships and networks, and the overlap seems obvious, perhaps.
I think that's a really good point, and I think that's one of the, the fourth purpose of an ICS is around those helping the NHS support this social development, or can't remember the phraseology, but exactly what you're saying. And I think that's one of the key contributions of the voluntary sector in that space. I also think you're absolutely right. Very echoing what Tracy said about whatever government, we're still going to be needing to be reducing health inequalities and working at a community level and working with individuals to resolve those circumstances, aren't we? So your main point.
I just think, Joe, as an observation from the conversation that I've been party to with the ICB, we've got to a stage where, in terms of our negotiations, discussions, and changes or the transformation of the delivery of DCL, we were at the point where it was all agreed and we were kind of moving forward at pace. And then, of course, the election came. The announcement of the election on the 4th of July, and then the notice came out from the ICB, and it just gave me a feeling, and again, I've no real experience of this, but it just made me feel that if it wasn't about money, what was the handbrake applied for? Because the structure, it doesn't really matter who's in government, what structure, how we deliver it, how we support the people who need our services. Because as you rightly pointed out, Maggie, they're still going to require our services. And Joe, you said it's still about integrated care. But is there, has the board said we are not in a position to be able to move forward, agree anything, any changes, because we don't know about funding? And my concern and observation and worry, if you want to call it that, would be when the Labour government come in, they will realise that there isn't as much money in the pot as they perhaps thought there would be, and and whatever their plan and manifesto strategy is, which is all about growth and so on and so forth to release funds. Will we be in a further tightening, a further austerity measure? And that's one of the key reason why contracts have not been continued or extended, and the 3 year doesn't become a 3 year because it's a hand to mouth situation. I don't know that. A lot of that's my assumption. I like your cat there. I love seeing the tail. But I'm just worried about that. This is the principle of this on hold status is down to a concern about finance, because we knew before this ICB, Lancashire and Cumbria were obviously wobbling in terms of their funds and whether they were going to be put into special measures because they were skint. And we know that they've fought very, very hard to stay out of special measures. But obviously now there's change of government. Have they gone hold everything, freeze everything, because we don't know the status of our finances? Just an observation, just thoughts and a concern.
And I'm definitely not speaking on behalf of the ICB, but my experience is that when a PERDA period is entered into, pretty much everything goes on hold, whether it really needs to or not. So I know what you're reading into it. I'm not sure I'd agree that that would be the reason for the pause. I think the reason for the pause is just because it's a PERDA period. Not that that helps particularly. Vic. Can't hear you, Vic. Just come off mute.
I would agree with what you're saying, Joe. I've been through several changes of government, and it is a standard practice just to put everything on hold, irrespective of whether it's relevant or not. I think political speculation's not a lot of use, really. I mean, I think you can pretty much guarantee that anything that smacked of the previous government will go out the window. So levelling up as a turn of phrase will be banned, and it will be reinvented as something else. It'll come up with a different name, and well, you can go back looking at levelling up, big society, the compact, whatever. The same process. They all go through the same process. I'd want to address your original question, Joe, a bit more, which is what do we want from our representatives? I think there will be some form of voluntary sector alliance body, irrespective of government changes, and we will have representatives and people doing things on behalf of the sector in various places. I hope. I'd be very surprised if we don't. And I think the issue for me is if we take the point raised by, is it Suzanne of Regenerate, around contracts, then do we adopt a position on contracts and stick to it? So if our auditors are saying, you have to have 2 years worth of business plan that are robust, then do we say to funders, health and other funders, we're not going to accept 1 year contracts? And would we stick to it? Or would there be exceptions? And I think that there's a position that you can go into forums knowing that the sector has a position on something. I mean, that might not be a good example, but I mean, it's the sort of thing that collective bodies can do, is that they can say, this is our position on this topic, and everybody that goes into every forum sticks to that position, and people get a message.
Yeah, that's very helpful, Vic. I think it's one of the things about being able to go into a space sort of reasonably sure of your ground. But I'm wondering if that's I wonder if that, like as you said, it might not be a great example, but if it in that vein, I wonder if we're at a stage of a maturity where we could come to that agreement amongst ourselves, and those exceptions, how would they happen? So that's definitely one to ponder, I think. But Okay. Suzanne?
Yeah, I just thanks for that Vic, and to pick up on Maggie's comment about absolutely, selling the benefits back to the ICB, absolutely on that. And I think, if I remember, the whole point of us talking and having in our strategy right from the get-go the idea of longer term contracts was that we were saying that not only does it help us with recruitment and ultimately retention of staff, the benefits of that are then felt by, whoever the contract holder, the ICB, whatever they're going to be called, was looking for. So I think we've already done that, in my view, and said that there are mutual benefits in these longer term approaches. It means that we're not suddenly having to go through the cost of onboarding and then squandering that because in 6 months' time somebody's looking for the next job and jumping ship and so on. And it was to ease that sort of up and down, topsy turvy that we all have to experience and loathe every year. So I think also, just to pick up on why the 3 years and not the 5, again, as I understand it, I thought the aspiration was 5 years, but I think maybe the common ground was, well, we get 3 and then there's the potential for rolling a couple of years. But that was my understanding. But I think, ideally we wanted 5, but we would sort of, agree around 3 with potential. At the moment, as I say, the point I'm making is we've ended up with just another 1. At a point where potentially I believe they could have given us a 3, and we would have then, all of us, I'm not just talking about our organisation, I'm talking all of the charitable organisations that are delivering dementia community links, and there's 5 of us that are classed as these preferred providers in that field across the county. We would have all then been in a much more stable position. And indeed, the customer group would have all been in a much more stable position.
Right. Thanks, Suzanne. Katie?
So really just an observation and thought around how we might want to add that to our communication and priority setting strategy for engaging with the various groups across the system. So that we've got the workforce development groups, we've got lots of priorities within the system that this fits with. So the system needs to look at having good staff retention at system level rather than NHS level. So therefore this is something that we could all constantly sort of keep chipping away at. Personally, I think it's probably too early in the maturity of the system to say, even though my heart goes out for you, how the hell you cope with 1-year contracts? We've had years of 3 and 5 and it's awful. But if the system's not ready and we hold a gun to their head, then we could inadvertently just be shooting ourselves in the foot. So there's something about how committed is the system to evolving as a system. So if they have a priority for workforce development and retention, then that has to be delivered with parity across the system when making decisions, particularly around commissioning.
Katie, I want to come back to you in a minute about, you made a point about the provider selection regime, but I think it's important that we understand, I think, that most of the NHS organisations work on 1-year funding as well. So I think the ability to commit to 5 years is certainly taking a huge risk financially for that organisation, I would suspect. So I think there's probably some of the reflection we need to do on ours and what are we bringing to the party as well. I think if we were clearer collectively on what we can bring, both in terms of our services, but our additional added value and maybe other opportunities to bring funding into the system, that might lead to a more equal conversation. As you say, Katie, holding a gun to people's heads that just counterproductive in almost every sense, isn't it? Can you just do a little bit on the provider selection regime? It looks like you've had some experience of that from your comment.
Yeah, so it changed for us as it did for a lot of different social care providers. So rather than constantly having to go out to recommissioning and bidding for the service you've been running for years, our commissioners now they have options. So the provider selection regime gives them 3 options. They can put it out to commission again, competitive tender as they always have. They can do a direct award, so they can just give us the contract for a further 5, 7, 10 years. I can't remember the cut-off. Or they can do, if there's significant changes to the contract. For instance, we deliver services in the whole of the Lancashire ICP footprint, but under 2 separate contracts with the same commissioners. If they wanted to merge those to align it to place, then they would have to do a consultation with stakeholders and service users, but they can still ultimately award that to us without going out to competitive tender. So, I mean, we are in that position right now, and it's interesting to, to walk through that and see how it goes, but it's certainly a hell of a lot less stressful than the recommissioning for everybody. The commissioners are the same, and I know that the King's Fund they just launched a new event that they're going to do in London just around the changing face of commissioning because of the new act that came into force and some of the further directives from NHS England, how that will completely change the kind of way they've been working, the power dynamic. So it's interesting to see that things are changing at pace nationally, but not so much locally.
Thanks, Katie. Sounds like an interesting topic for a blog for the Alliance website. Just so as you know, we're one of 42 voluntary sector alliances across England, and we're working together now to try and get an alliance of alliances so that we can summate this information and insight and bring it directly to DHSC and NHS England. So it would be these forums. There is a track, if you see what I mean. There is a trajectory with this. We just need to make sure that we are together enough. We don't have to be all sort of walking off into the sunset together, hand in hand, but we're together enough that we can give cogent information to the people who are designing these systems. Anyway, Maggie.
I just sort of wanted to pick up with the point again about employee retention and recruitment, and just to sort of float something perhaps. I was at a conference recently, and the gentleman who was speaking talked about his model for his organisation, which was he doesn't employ any staff for longer than 5 years. And at the time, I was really shocked, thinking, "Oh, I'm not sure how could that possibly work? I spend half my time trying to retain my staff." But he articulated a really positive model about how people learn and develop and continue to be interested in their work and bringing innovation to their roles. And he talked about a model of supporting them through significant training and personal development to actually move on a career pathway to something bigger and better. And I just wondered if there was some way of applying that kind of thinking, that kind of model to some of the work we do with our recruitment and pathways into other roles. If we build that in from the beginning, that's the understanding when you take someone on, that it's a proactive progression opportunity. It's just a different way of looking at it. And as I've thought about it over the time since the conference, I've sort of started to come around to think, actually, maybe that might be a different way, and we become the workforce pathway. Just wanted to.
That's super interesting, because that's definitely been discussed, not quite in those terms, but in the workforce committee, about system roles and system career paths. And routes from volunteering into quality employment and all that sort of stuff. So Maggie, I'd encourage you when we do finally get these invites or expressions of interest out for the people committee subgroups to have a look at some of those. I think that'd be an interesting conversation. Annie.
Just wanted to pick up on that one. We're actually, when we're recruiting somebody and it's only on a 12-month basis, then we're trying to explain that we've got a long-term strategy, and although we might not have the money for a long-term strategy right now, we will have, because I'll keep on pecking away, but the roles are there to be fulfilled, and there are new roles coming up as our funding builds up. We've linked with local Lancashire Adult Learning, Myerscough College. They're delivering the accredited training, and then we've got links with the local colleges as well. So if somebody's coming to us because they're a bit broken, and then we're getting them to progress and build up the resilience and the confidence, we've got pathways sort of trailblazed for them already. So we've cleared a lot of the blocks to get them into further and higher education. So it's interesting. I've not thought about this concept as a sort of bigger picture. This is what we're doing. This is how we progress people. Because again, the work that we do here can enable somebody else to progress on to something else. And that's just, it's an idea that I've not really thought about, but it's another really good way of promoting us, isn't it? That we are, just like the NHS teaching hospitals are teaching hospitals where you gain this experience and you further your career, so are we. We are enabling this to happen. And it's frustrating for us because we've got a social services, social prescribing, all those different subjects at University of Central Lancashire, which is affiliated with the NHS and the teaching hospitals. And we don't get any psychologists coming through to do the work placements here. And yet we're ace. But I'll pass that on to another, it's probably another argument, isn't it? But just wanted to say that's really interesting about the pathways and how we're already doing that, but I didn't realise it was a thing. Thank you.
Oh, Maggie again.
I just wanted to add that how difficult it is for me at Community Solutions, because we're a really small charity. You know, I've only got 22 staff if I include the facilities and the cafe team. So there are really limited opportunities for people to progress. And whilst I do want to hang on to people, and I am always finding funding and trying to develop new projects, nevertheless, it would be a great opportunity for my team as well as for the sector, I think.
Okay, thanks very much. Vic?
Slight change of point, but going back to your question, which was around what do I want from representatives? I think I want them to remember that West Lancs exists, as it were. And I think you know, we're dealing with a very big geographical area, and geography and place are significant. And I think some simple geographical cascading model, so that when people are in forums, they can say with confidence, I don't know that, but if you're looking at Blackburn, go to this. If you're looking at Blackpool, go there. If you're looking at this part of Lancashire, you know, which is divided into these 3 delivery areas, there's somebody who will cascade it around them. You know, that sort of cascade model of being able to say with confidence that we have a system would, I think, be welcome, because geography is almost impossible to, you know, to represent, even with years of experience of working with county level. You know, you're not going to have that level of detail of knowing what goes on from wherever it is in the north to wherever it is in the south, to Bickerstaff to whatever is up there in Cumbria. How far north does Barrow and Westmoreland go?
Right,
You
thanks.
see what
Vic.
I'm saying? Is
Yeah,
that sometimes if you're representing, it's easier to say, look, I don't know, it's a valid point. I can find out, or if you go to this person, if that's what you want to know, then here's the point of contact and have that at your fingertips.
yeah, thanks, Vic. And thank you for bringing us back to the question constantly. It's reminding we're
Twice.
trying to get
Not constantly.
well, twice, all right. To reminding we're trying to get our priorities for our reps right. Elle or Suzanne?
Yeah, I think just on your the staffing point, I think the other factor is the fact that there is a significant demand in other sectors and other worlds that are pulling staff away, and opportunities exist, whereas perhaps they weren't. And I kind of reflect from time in education where you had this wrestle between newly qualified teachers and existing teachers, and what was the best dynamic of a school. And I guess we settled on a combination of the energy and the creativeness and the innovation of newly qualified, sort of enthusiastic teachers coming into a marketplace, coming into the school, rather than the people that have been there that are maybe a bit jaded, a bit tired, and a bit sort of counting the days down to the retirement. So the combination of those two dynamics rubbing together made the school's academic year successful, and I think I see that in our sector. We bring in people, and we try to bring in people who are, have got innovation, have got creativity, have got dynamism. But you also need those people who absolutely love the charity, love the sector, and want to stay in it, but stay in it at a particular level because they do a great job at that level, and they also have amazing contacts. And if you've got obviously excessive churn, those contacts are being burned on a regular basis. So for me, I think it's a combination, but I think we're definitely going through a phase where it is becoming increasingly difficult to attract people, increasingly difficult to retain people. And certainly when you overlay volunteers into that, which obviously are our unpaid sector of people, that is becoming even more competitive because the choice that people have now, where they choose to volunteer is huge. And I think all of those link into, contract lengths, rates, the commission rates, whatever we are getting, our ICBs are the commissioning services, paying what is needed as opposed to what they can get away with, because that then adds it in and it all links back to churn. It comes into dissatisfaction, comes into training and development and staff retention, etc. So everything's intrinsically linked. So it's just an observation to make.
Thanks, Val. Dave?
Hello. Yeah, I'll try and keep to the point. I think a priority should be the value of a partnership, really. And I think all these problems that NHS are facing, as well as everybody else, staff, for example, there are people out there who are already probably doing the job but don't get the support. You know what I mean? A smaller organisation, smaller community organisation. So why are you looking for a new person to do a job? Why don't you look to a smaller local organisation and support them that are already doing the job, kind of thing? You know what I'm saying? So youth workers, the youth zone wants to employ like 40 youth workers. You're not going to get them. So why don't they work with local, you know what I mean, local organisations in a way? And I think the priority should be emphasising how we as a partnership can overcome the challenges. You know what I'm saying? Whether it's staff retention or offering the pathways into creative outlets or doing the mindfulness and the well-being to get them, their environment and whatever, you know what I mean? I think that is where our strengths lie. And then in terms of contracts, I think again it's about slicing off the top and bringing it down, to be honest, to the people on the ground. So yeah, that would be my priority personally.
So are you talking about a sort of system-wide slice for anything that comes in towards working with voluntary sector, or am I reading onto what you said?
No, I think there's something in it. If I'm honest with you, I don't know enough about probably the NHS and stuff like that, but it just seems simple to me. Is you've got all these large organisations doing things, but they've all got problems. They're trying to solve problems when there's a whole load of local new small organisations around them that lack support, lack finances, lack opportunities and whatever. And if you slice a bit of that money off and give it to them, they could help you achieve some of your tasks. You know what I mean? Whether it's referral pathways or staff retention or whatever it is, it just seems to me that there's a whole bunch of people who don't really engage in meetings like this, to be honest with you. Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Dave. Maggie?
If I can I wanted to come back to Mel's point about the fact that the contracts aren't necessarily paying what we need at the end of the day, and coming then back to the point that we tender for contracts and we then put in bids that are the most cost effective that we can be, perhaps because we believe that we are competing in a competitive cost environment. I wondered whether, and Angela, I'm sure you've got some real insight from some of the commissioning work that you've done to compare across organisations what we are actually, costing ourselves at the end of the day. And I wonder whether there's something we could do around some sort of transparency. If we all had a made up project potentially that we all costed a budget for, just to compare across the sector. Because ultimately, when it comes down to the money, we suddenly all compete. We'll all sit here around the table being super great friends. And then when it really comes to the crunch, we tender for contracts at the end of the day in a competitive environment at the end of the day. And I just wondered if there's a way of us being more transparent, us being a bit more informed and therefore maybe less cautious in bidding for a bit more or putting a more realistic cost in.
Okay, Angela?
Yeah, I mean, definitely not an expert, Maggie, but obviously we've got massive experience of this. And in fact, we had a conversation earlier about management costs and the variation within the sector of those. And you can't be dictatorial, can you, with organisations to say you need to put in 5% or you need to put in 10%, but it can be preclusive. I know that there's a large organisation in Lancashire who had put in for the delivery of a project. They were the best candidates, but their management costs were really high, and I'm sure they weren't inflated by any means, but the commissioner basically said, no, we will not pay that, because they didn't compare to other proposals that were put in at a lower rate. And that is the key difficulty, isn't it? So you can say anywhere between 5 and 10% is viable, but actually, is that realistic? It depends on the size of the contract as well, doesn't it? The other thing that we don't, you tender for a 3-year commission, but year on year, you've got to give incremental pay rises to your staff. And rarely we put that consideration into our costings if we're bidding or tendering for a service. So those kind of hidden costs that your organisation will have to just backfill, actually, we need to be much more transparent about those and say, yep, there will be cost rises, because that's what happens. So yeah, I think there's definitely a bit of work to be done around that area, Maggie, and I'd welcome those more open discussions about what others are doing and where they pitch themselves, because if we're up against a national organisation who's putting really low management costs in because they can be subsumed by a huge infrastructure, how then do we compete as local organisations?
Tracy?
And just kind of showing how there is synergy between the discussions happening at the Alliance and here. At the Alliance meeting last week, we discussed full cost recovery models and talked about how we can have some consistency across the sector, because I think, like Angela said, there's real recognition that there's such difference in terms of the way in which organisations cost things. But actually, what we want to do is influence all funders, but particularly for this purpose, the ICB, to recognise that we have to operate in an environment of full cost recovery, and that actually we can't just be given a funding envelope and a set of metrics and deliver against it. We need to be able to be around the table when decisions are made very early on as to what services are going to be commissioned and what funding is going to be available. Because if the commission's going to go to our sector, then we need to really make sure that we can reflect the full costs of it as we, you know, apply for that funding. So those conversations are absolutely, you know, on the radar of leaders across the Alliance. And I think if we can come up with something that gives a bit of an indication, because my experience is that a lot of commissioners across health and local authorities struggle to understand our models of full cost recovery. And as Angela said, often because there are discrepancies, they throw an organisation out when they may be the best one to deliver it. So yeah, I think there is quite a lot of work to do on that.
Okay, Suzanne, and then me.
Just to give a very real example of that, again, back to DCL. So we're one of 5 providers who have been through a process and negotiated and so on. We've been shown the budget for the prospective next few years, and it is no way covering full cost recovery. Forget management fee and that issue there. No money for training, no money for providing the tech, the practical, you know, that a member of staff would need to have, laptop, you know, pad, phone and stuff at all. I have made the point back. I think we're all consistent in all the providers have batted this back. My specific argument is that it is totally unacceptable for third sector organisations to be expected to cough up those additional sums effectively out of charitable resources. And I've said quite categorically, I am not prepared to accept a contract on those terms where I would have to basically turn around to my funders and my sponsors and say, oh, by the way, guys, you know that 5,000 quid you raised through the sponsored walk? I'm actually using it to train my staff to deliver a public sector contract. That has happened. It is happening now with this ICB, and I just think it's just totally unacceptable.
Right, thanks very much, Suzanne. So we've talked a lot about commissions and procurement and what have you. There's a number of organisations on the call who don't have commissions and maybe aren't necessarily looking for them. So it'd be interesting to understand from your perspective what your reps, the priorities for you might be. So I'm thinking particularly around kind of the last point that Suzanne made about that your community fundraising, your corporate relationships and what have you, there's still an interface with the health and care system. So what is it that would be helpful in that regard? If there's nothing, or if nobody's got anything to say, that's fine. But I didn't want it to be just about organisations that have commissions from health or care organisations. Anything? Alrighty, so we've got a couple of hands go up. So Louise.
Hi. Yeah, as a non-commissioned charity, it does make it slightly difficult because the conversations that you're all having, you know, if we were to provide a service, we would provide all our own equipment, everything, training, provided by ourselves through fundraising and through things like that. So the reason that the Alliance representatives, really for me, it's about making those links and standing up for the ones that aren't commissioned so that we also have that voice where people can recognise that we're as valuable as everybody else that's here as we are. And we might be providing something very different to what everybody else provides. So that's sort of the type of representation I would like. it's to represent the ones that are not commissioned. And how do we not necessarily get commissioned, but how do we have that voice? Which I think you're doing anyway, but I just thought I'd bring that up.
So I think a lot of the conversations can centre around the things that the ICB pays for, Louise. So you're not getting off that easily. I just would like to tease out a little bit, like standing up for and that voice. You know, some organisations aren't looking to be commissioned, as you say. But what is it that representatives in the system can do in that space? I mean, we can tell stories, but that would always be second hand. So I suppose what does that look like, or what if you had a perfect representative, what would that look like to you, I suppose?
Wow, that's saying you're not perfect, Joe. And Tracy and Angela, you're all amazing. So for us, that representative is just one that will fight for the charity sector to be understood that we are professionals and we can do the work, and we're not just maybe somebody, and I'm not saying that doing some work in a church hall with serving tea and coffee is not a valid piece of work. It absolutely is. And for those people that attend, that is the most wonderful thing that those people might attend a week. But also that it is needed by that community. And it's that representation that is really important to me. And so the Integrated Care Board are not just seeing big professional organisations as being the most valuable part of the charity sector and the VCFSE. They're also seeing these small groups that might not have really any money or anybody to shout for them. That's what I think my alliance representative, I would want them to stand up and shout about.
Making notes.
Yeah, okay.
We're also recording, obviously, so yeah. Angela.
Yeah, I think Louise, your point is well made, and it's been raised actually by the faith organisations, hasn't it? Those that are doing fantastic work in the communities who didn't have a platform to showcase what they're doing, and often just do it anyway because that's kind of what they do. But actually, it's really important to recognise the impact that they have, because if they aren't there, if they're not doing what they're doing, there's going to be more pressure on other system partners, including the larger VCF organisations, but also including our statutory partners. So we now have a link to faith organisations, and we have connectivity, I think, through the CVSs with the smaller groups, but it is evidencing the impact of that I think is probably more difficult to drill down.
Tracy?
Thanks. Yeah, thanks, Louise. I think that's a really good point that you make. And I think I'd go a little bit further and say it is about that recognition and about that understanding. And we do have roles as reps to really foster that understanding of what our sector looks like, what are the benefits of all the diversity that exists across our sector. Because let's face it, we're not easy to work with because we are so diverse. But we're so good at what we do because we are so diverse. You know, we can make a massive difference on the ground to people and communities in in very, very quick time, in crises, in all types of situations. We're quite fleet of foot and can work at pace. And a lot of that is done by those smaller groups in communities. We all know this. But I'd like to go a step further and say our work as reps is about making that case, but also making sure those groups can be sustained so that actually all the funding doesn't end up with the big players, and that we have a really good ecosystem of voluntary sector groups, voluntary action, things happening within communities that we recognise is making a huge contribution to keeping people well. And how do we make sure that the system actually supports this work? And I think that is a big step for us to say we really want to advocate on behalf of these groups and make sure that we are in the room saying these things when decisions are being made, because I think I've seen steps in the right direction with this, but I think that we're still being looked to as an alliance, as a wider group of sector leaders, to make sense of our sector, for not just for commissioning, but for people to just work alongside those groups and organisations.
Thanks, Tracy. Angela, then Louise again.
Yeah, so I'm just going on about this point. We talked when there was a threat of those cuts to VCFSE organisations via place or at ICB level or whatever. We did talk about the potential impact of those cuts, but I'm not sure if we do it well as a collective. And I think that it would be quite a good thing to do it as a visual in terms of the domino effect. So if you cut, and I'm going to say a knit and natter group because, you know, that's fairly easy. If the funding for that is cut, those 20 people that are in that group, where are they going to go next? What is going to happen to their mental health or their physical health or the support that they receive? So it would be really, I think it might be quite a simple process to put that into a visual kind of film, to say by not considering those smaller groups, this will be the eventual impact, that domino effect of, you know, the far-reaching kind of current of impact across all of our system partners. So it might be worth us looking at that from a comms perspective, Joe, and see if we can get some help with creating a visual that represents that.
Well, certainly. I mean, that applies as much to the knit and natter group as it does to hospices, doesn't it? You know, it's from end to end. And if anybody here wants to offer help with coming up with that, then that would be very useful. Okay, so we've got Louise, then Katie, then Maggie, then Shagufta.
And I will add that the work that we do at Heartbeat, you know, we would love to be commissioned, but we've always struggled with that voice because we've always done what we've done and we've always self-funded that. So there is a bit of an impression of, well, you funded it yourselves for 48 years. Why do you need us now? So just put in a little bit that we're not a tiny charity. We're also not a massive charity, and we've self-funded for so long that people sort of expect that from us. So it's very difficult to get into a system that would commission us, because why is it needed? So it's good to have that voice from the Alliance to actually turn around and go, do you know what? There's other things happening that maybe need support. I'll shut up now.
Right, thanks, Louise. Maggie? Sorry, Katie. Sorry, Maggie, it's Katie next. Sorry.
Yeah, so just speaking to what Angela was saying, and Louise actually, so it occurred to me listening to Louise that the system's very aware that we have such a diverse and vast range of people working out in the voluntary sector communities. So one of the things that I was thinking it might be useful to do is something called a spotlight series on the website, because the system leaders do look at that website. I assume you get data on hits and stuff like that. But if we could do like a spotlight series, that might help us as well when we're going to these meetings and we're representing the VCFSE. It will give them an insight into, this is the vast array of people that we're here sort of representing when we come to these meetings. I'd love Louise to do a spotlight series and to be able to read that on the LSC website. I think that would be great. So just a thought, we've done it, we've introduced it in our organisation nationally, and it's gone down a storm because you get to know people, you know, and you get ideas, and it's just really good for sort of keeping people motivated, building energy. So yeah, that's what I wanted to suggest.
That's a really good suggestion, Katie, and I can already think of 2 or 3 avenues for that. One, I kind of flippantly before said about the blog part of the Alliance website, but it's not that flippant. If we could get some kind of semi-standardized thing that people would do in that sort of spotlight series, not only could
We
it be
have one
hosted
already,
there,
and I'm happy to
perfect.
share that.
That'd be great.
I'm happy to help, you know, if it's needed. I don't mind being hands-on with some of that. We've
Great,
got some
thanks,
comms
Katie.
leads in Lancashire that can perhaps give a hand as well.
And the other avenue for this is that I've mentioned to a couple of you on the call, and I put it on my LinkedIn videos that I've been doing. A lot of these system meetings will start with a patient story, or they'll start with a staff story or something like that. And actually, where you can draw a line between what you're doing and perhaps what the purpose of a committee is, that can be quite impactful, especially I'm thinking in terms of the quality committee, where they talk about the experience. Quite often it's a negative experience, but sometimes it's a positive experience. And I've got no qualms in saying that quite often the positive experience is because of the involvement of a voluntary sector organisation. So I think what we need to make more of that route. There are people within the ICB, but also other organisations that gather those stories, and there's a way to get those into the plan, the what do they call them? Like the forward plan for the meetings for the year. So there's a way to get them onto that roster. So I think that's a great idea, Katie. Thank you. Maggie and then Shagufta. Can't hear you, Maggie.
That segues quite nicely into my question, and a bit like Vic, I wanted us to bring us back to what I'd like reps to do. You mentioned at the beginning, Joe, about pre and post session communications, and one of the obsessions I've got in a minute is why aren't agendas posted somewhere? How do I feed in questions to various partnership meetings that I would like, in this instance, my rep to raise, you know, or to suggest for a future agenda? And I wondered whether there was any way on the Alliance website that agendas for meetings could be posted in advance, and even minutes of all the meetings, you know, are they not accessible somehow, that they could be, you know, just from a basic point of communication? I don't want to be bombarded with, but if they were there for me to go and look at, and I've just had a quick flick around and I've not been able to find. My apologies if there's a massive library that I've missed somewhere.
No, you haven't. I think I'll just respond sort of like pragmatically. I think the amount of resource we have available within the Alliance would limit that ability. However, and I'll come back to the agendas point in a second. Where are the minutes? Quite often these committees are not in public. And what you will find is on the ICB, so the website I showed you before, the 6 boxes, on the ICB one, there is a meetings and papers part. And in each of those, there is an advise, alert, assurance. It's called a AAA report from each of the subcommittees of the ICB. So you can go and find what was discussed, and it addresses the problem that we have always had. How do we communicate confidential items in this space? And it's super difficult to do that. So the AAA reports, which are on under each ICB meetings and papers section, there will be AAA reports from all of those subcommittees. On the agendas point, I don't know the answer to that, but I will definitely ask. And I think one of the positives about the Alliance is you know people to ask. We've got Claire on the call today. We've got all others from our contacts in the governance who actually manage the meetings and the forward plans and all of that sort of stuff. So I'll take that as an action and say, how do we get that information out there? There is a practical limitation in that the way that the meetings are set is that those tend to come out 7 to 5 days before the meeting actually takes place. So it would require people to be able to, I don't know how this would happen, but you'd need to be almost on it constantly, looking at where is this coming up. There are, as far as I'm aware, agenda setting meetings between the chair of each committee and significant officers that line with the work plan. So maybe that's an option, but I will go away and find out, and I'll come back to you all. Okay, finally, Shagufta, and then I'm going to wrap this section up, and I'm going to talk about the future of the Assembly. So Shagufta.
Just a quick question, Joe, or a point. You know, the message you put in chat about the state of sector report. Is that going to show like the impact of the voluntary sector? Are we going to gather some data to sort of show the impact, or how is that? That would be really useful, I think.
Yeah. So just very quickly, because that is not settled yet. What we're in the information gathering point here. I think when we originally set out on this, it was to have a static document that was created. That's evolving now into thinking about a dashboard. So again, on the Voluntary Sector Alliance website, we've got that VCSE in numbers section. It's an evolution of that. How do we get to the demographics of the sector in terms of scale, numbers, and what have you, that's reported and downloadable from the Charity Commission and other places? But then the other point is information about your workforce, for example, is in the trustees' annual report. It's not something that is takeable from a CSV file. So that is quite a dickens of a job, is to go through, you know, there's 300 people who receive the Voluntary Sector Alliance newsletter, to go through all of those annually and try and do that manually or even with an AI script would be very difficult and probably quite expensive. So what we're thinking of doing, but we're not there yet, but there's a lot of ideas kicking around, and welcome anybody's input into this, by the way. What we're thinking of doing is, I don't know if any of you are members of the Chamber of Commerce, but they do a quarterly pulse survey where they ask a very limited set of questions that everybody commits to answering as part of their membership. And from that information, the CBI does its business confidence survey quarterly, which is what the government pays attention to. What we're thinking of doing is designing a set of questions that we would all collectively commit to answering on a quarterly basis or some other period, which would help us create that insight, and that would be as live as we could make it on this dashboard. Your second question about impact, absolutely. That was the feedback from the Voluntary Sector Assembly, was if all this is a list of facts and figures about the voluntary sector, it's pointless. Actually, what we need to be doing here is talking about what's the difference made by working with us, how we can see more impact could be made, and what we've got to offer as a collective, as individuals, that could actually improve the system. And again, it goes to that fourth purpose of ICSs. So absolutely, we've got the Voluntary Sector Assembly feedback from March. We've got stakeholders happening on Friday. And from that, we will synthesize the spec for what is actually going to be delivered. All right.
That sounds really good. That does sound really good.
I really hope so. So yeah, support with that, talking about it. As I said, the CVSs are going to be closely involved in that as well on the place side. So really need to get as many responses to this as we humanly can. Just Maggie, I want to move on, but Maggie's just posted, could reps post a blog, read the meeting schedule and maybe a summary of key points discussed. So we have done that. With the analytics, we realized that there was maybe 3 people looking at those things. Arguably, it was the way it was presented or the way it was found on the website or what have you. But it's also an immense contribution of time from voluntary sector reps to do that, who are, let's not forget, volunteers. So as you all know, it's a massive ask to prepare for a meeting, contribute in the meeting. Then there's invariably a task and finish group or a subcommittee set up to look at this, and it just expands and expands and expands. So ideally that would be something that we could have a service level agreement between reps and the Alliance for their time and commitment and energy on the behalf of the sector, not their organisation. We're not there yet, but that's definitely somewhere we want to go. Some of you may have seen me doing videos pre and after meetings. I'm trying to keep those going. I think there's a way between LinkedIn and things like that, the AAA reports, if we can get an answer on the agenda, WhatsApp, I don't know what it is, that we can get this communication going. I don't know what it is. We need to really work on the comms. To wit, what I'd like to discuss now is the future of the Voluntary Sector Assembly. So as Tracy said at the beginning, we started this off in November 22 with an idea for a Lancashire and South Cumbria Voluntary Sector Assembly. Since then, there's been an awful lot of things that have happened. And we've also had the advent of LACVS's local project. Rachel either is or certainly was on the call from local. So there is a question in our heads about, is there still worth in a Lancashire and South Cumbria Voluntary Sector Assembly where people come together virtually or in person at 4 points during the year? We are wondering whether actually a better use of everybody's time might be that we change the way the assembly works and have it aligned with those place partnerships and the subdivisions in the Lancashire place. So it's an idea at this point, is to say, how might that work? Might that be useful? Is that going to disenfranchise Lancashire-wide organisations? Is there our feeling is that there's a heck of a lot of meetings, and I don't want the Alliance and the Assembly to be something else that's added to the mix that people feel like they have to come to if there are networks, and as I mentioned, local exists that could perform that function, and we just make sure the comms are right between local, the Alliance or another. Thoughts, please, because this will really help us make these decisions. Or is this a really useful space? That's
Do you want some comment, Joe, on that?
Absolutely, yeah. That's why we're here.
I think if we just said the Alliance is the voice, then the voice needs to be one voice, a uniform voice across, in my mind, the county, representing and obviously relating to the ICB. If we separated it, and I can understand why you're saying it's a possible or an option. The issue is you will have potentially miscommunication and different messages, different tones of voice, different levels of activity and action and priorities potentially. And I think you then lead, it also minimises. So if somebody's working across 2 or 3 different areas, they would then have to join 2 or 3 different experiences because they are across Lancashire as opposed to simply working in one small micro area. So I absolutely back the one voice. The Alliance represents Lancashire and South Cumbria, ties in with the ICB. Obviously, the ICB's delivery is via a place method and design structure, but the voice needs to be across the county. That would be my thoughts.
Thanks, Mel. Anyone for any more?
I'll chip in, Joe. So
Thanks,
I
Jason.
just think I think there's a place for understanding what's happening across the system, because I'm sure the system does that as well. However, I don't know that it's about groups of us meeting up. For me, this work that we're doing here, we've still got a long way to go. We're still galvanising, we're still strengthening, we're finding our feet and finding our way. If you then, I struggle as it is, you know, with my day job, if I'm then thinking about sort of moving to integrate with the wider unitary areas, I think I would struggle, and also I would worry that that would take something away from what we're trying to achieve here, because it feels like we're on a journey. So yeah,
Okay.
that's my thought.
Thanks. Thanks, Katie. Maggie and then Kirsty.
I apologise if I'm just a bit dim, but I end up slightly confused with all the different sort of partnership meetings, whether it's CBS and their VCF meeting, whether it's Alliance or Assembly. I was slightly perturbed, Tracy, that you mentioned there having been an Assembly meeting that I've missed, that I was, you know. So if we can bring it under one umbrella, I sort of stand with Mel of trying to have one voice and one partnership. Whether that becomes a ridiculously unwieldy agenda, I'm not quite sure. But I've been to quite a few meetings that haven't been well attended, and maybe if you could get us somehow aligned better, I'm sure.
Thanks, Maggie. Kirsty.
Hi, yeah, I think I was just going to build on what Mel said in terms of how that connection between the ICB and the VCFSE sector, and it's tricky, isn't it, because we're such a diverse sector. But so by introducing more alliances or more kind of broken down piecemeal alliances, would that not confuse the message further rather than make things easier with that connection with the ICB? So I think that having that one voice would be a stronger voice than trying to sort of break it down into sort of several different areas.
Okay, thanks, Kirsty. Anybody got an opposing view? Safe space? No. Okay. Well, thank you very much, everybody. I think I've got what I needed out of today. Tracy?
Thanks, Joe. I think just finally, it's probably worthwhile just sort of summarising some of the discussions really, and saying that I think there's been a lot of really interesting points raised about what representation actually is. And I think that is something that all of us reps grapple with all of the time, around us putting ourselves forward as reps and being elected as reps, because I think we're very mindful of the fact that, you know, Vic said we can't speak for the whole geography. Absolutely we can't. We can't speak for the whole sector. And I think that whilst we really recognise the need for that representation across the places we are and more of the places, we know it's a flawed model and it can't do everything that we want it to do. I think one of the things that I did just want to say as we finish, because we've had some really interesting conversations and I think there's been some positives and negatives that have come out of this, but I think one of the things that I want you to just sort of think about and take forward is, when we look outside of our system, so outside of Lancashire and South Cumbria, everyone is grappling with all of this. We're not unique, which won't surprise any of you, but actually an awful lot of other voluntary sector colleagues are looking to Lancashire and South Cumbria because we have got our act together on a lot of this. And I know that might not feel like it day to day. And I know we've got a long way to go, certainly when we talk about commissioning models and we talk about the equity that we feel in those spaces as equal partners. We know we've got work to do around a lot of this agenda, but actually having an alliance and having an assembly, having the website, which I think is a fantastic resource and we can make better use of it, and we've come up with a lot of ideas today of how to do that, is something other people are mirroring because they recognise that it is moving us forward. And I think it was Katie who said journey. I think we absolutely are on a journey with this work. And sometimes I'm not quite sure what the destination is, but I think we've got some really good ideas from today around what it is we want as a sector. And also I think we've had a really open conversation where people have said, well, actually, I think maybe this is going well, but actually I think there's work to do on this. And I really welcome that, because I think that honesty and transparency that we can bring to these meetings is really valuable. So I think we're going to finish earlier than we said, but isn't it nice to get a bit of time back, especially on a hot day like this? So yeah, thank you so much for contributing this afternoon, and we will summarise these discussions and we will let you know how we're taking things forward in terms of the model that we're operating and in terms of what what priorities us as reps are taking with us to those meetings and feeding back to you. So unless anybody's not got anything else to say, I will close the meeting. Thank you all very much for coming and enjoy the sunshine.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Stephanie, straight in there with the feedback report. Well